Have you ever held a secret so heavy it felt less like a piece of information and more like a physical object? A lodestone of truth buried in the soil of your life that, once unearthed, threatens to alter the very gravity of your entire world. To rewrite not just your future, but to cast a new, unforgiving light upon every memory you've ever cherished, making you question the very foundation of your past. What I hold in my hands is not just a book. It is my mother's heart, captured in ink and bound in scuffed brown leather. For 45 years, nearly half a century, I lived with a specific, aching absence. My older sister, Clara, with a face as placid as a summer lake, looked me in the eye just weeks after we buried our mother and told me this diary was gone. Lost, she said, accidentally thrown out with the detritus of death, the old clothes and yellowed papers. And I, hollowed out by a grief so profound I could barely remember my own name, I believed her. For 45 years, I mourned the loss of my mother's final private thoughts as a second death. But the universe, I've learned, has a way of writing its own scales, often in the most terrifying of ways. 3 months ago, a routine doctor's visit turned into a hushed conversation in a too-bright room. The words "suspicious shadows" and "more tests" hung in the air, and suddenly my own mortality wasn't a distant philosophical concept, but a pressing immediate reality. It was this brush with my own ending that sent me into the dusty silence of my attic, not to clean, but to connect, to find some thread, any thread that would lead me back to my mother's strength. And it was there, tucked away, not even with any malicious intent, but with a carelessness that feels even more insulting, buried beneath a stack of my sister's old winter coats she'd asked me to store for her a decade ago and never retrieved. That I found it. This diary. It wasn't lost. It had been hidden, taken, and the small tarnished brass key, it was in the pocket of her favorite cashmere coat, the one she always said made her feel powerful, untouchable, as if she'd forgotten it was there, or perhaps in some dark corner of her soul, she believed she was so far beyond consequence that it no longer mattered. When I finally turned the key and heard that soft, definitive click, I wasn't filled with joy. I was filled with a dread so cold it felt like ice in my veins, because I knew with a certainty that stole my breath that I wasn't just about to read my mother's words. I was about to unravel my entire life. And what I found within these pages, it was more than a story of a mother's love. It was a map of a betrayal so vast, so calculated that it spanned the entirety of my adult life. I discovered the existence of a second will, a true will, and a legacy of love that was meant to be mine, a legacy that my own sister systematically, deliberately, and ruthlessly stole from me for 45 years. To understand the depth of the fracture, you must first see the beauty of the whole plate. Before the lock and the lies, there was a world painted in warm golden hues. We were the Davies women. My mother, Eleanor, was magic. She wasn't just a painter, she was an alchemist of light and emotion. She could capture the way the afternoon sun turned a simple vase of daisies into a beacon of hope, or the quiet sorrow in a rain-streaked window pane. Our house wasn't just a building, it was a living, breathing extension of her soul. Her studio was the sanctuary, a glorious, chaotic mess of stretched canvases, the pungent, familiar smell of turpentine and linseed oil, and tubes of paint squeezed into beautiful, tortured shapes. And my sister Clara, she was my sun and my moon in those days. Only 2 years older, but to my young eyes, she possessed all the wisdom and courage in the world. She was my fierce, tiny protector. I can still feel the visceral memory of her small, determined hand grabbing mine on the walk to school, her voice firm and clear, telling the boys who teased me for my quietness to "Get lost, you lot." She was my fortress. My mother had this beautiful philosophy, one she wove into our bedtime stories and our dinner table conversations. She called it the golden thread. She told us that every family is connected by an invisible golden thread woven from love, memory, and legacy. It's what binds you through joy and sorrow. She said it was our sacred duty, mine and Clara's, to protect that thread, to mend it when it frayed, and to weave it even stronger for the generations that would follow us. I believed in that thread with my whole heart. It felt more real to me than anything. Then the storm. My mother's diagnosis was like a door slamming shut at the end of a bright hallway. Pancreatic cancer. It was swift and it was merciless. The vibrant, life-filled woman who taught me to see beauty in everything was suddenly reduced to a wisp of herself in a hospital bed. I was 23, my life a blank canvas of possibilities just waiting for the first brushstroke. I put it all on hold. I moved back home. For 6 long, heartbreaking months, I was her caregiver. I bathed her frail body. I read to her when she was too weak to hold a book. I held the basin when the treatments made her sick. It was the hardest, most sacred work of my life. Clara, ever practical, ever the head to my heart, managed the logistics, the appointments, the finances, the difficult calls to relatives. She would say, "May, you take care of Mom's spirit. I'll take care of the rest." And in my grief-addled state, it felt like a perfect, painful partnership, a final united front of love for our mother. The silence after she was gone was the loudest sound I have ever heard. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and somber faces. A week later, Clara came to the house. She was different. The shared vulnerability of our visual was gone, replaced by a brisk, almost clinical efficiency. "May, you're too emotional. You're not thinking clearly. Let me handle the estate, all the paperwork. It's what I'm good at." And I was a ghost, a walking, breathing shell of grief. The foundation of my world had crumbled, and the thought of navigating legal documents felt like trying to read a foreign language. So I nodded. I signed what she put in front of me. I trusted my big sister, the fortress. The story she told me was simple, clean, and ultimately a complete fabrication. The house, our family home filled with a lifetime of memories, was to be sold. The proceeds, she said, would be split evenly between us. There was a small life insurance policy, also to be divided. And our mother's paintings, her soul rendered in color and form. She told me that Mom's wish was for them to stay in the family. But as I was unsettled and didn't have the space, she would keep them safe in her large, spacious, climate-controlled home. She promised me with a hand on my arm that I could visit them anytime, that they would be our shared treasure. Then through my tears, I asked the question that had been burning a hole in my heart. Mom's diary, what happened to it? Clara's face softened into a mask of perfect, practiced sympathy. She sighed, a sound of weary regret. "Oh, May, I'm so sorry. And all the chaos of clearing out the house, I think it got boxed up with some old books and things for the charity shop. It's gone." And that was it, the final blow. I collapsed right there on the bare floorboards of my mother's empty studio, sobbing until I had no tears left. I felt that I had lost her all over again. I had lost her voice. For 45 years, I built a life upon that loss. I became a teacher, hoping to pass on a fraction of the wonder my mother instilled in me. I married a kind, gentle man. I raised children and then grandchildren, telling them stories of their magical, artistic grandmother. I tried with every fiber of my being to be the golden thread for my own family. Claire and I, we were civil. We saw each other on holidays, exchanged polite gifts, but a distance had grown, one I attributed to our different lives. She was the successful businesswoman, always traveling, always busy. The paintings, she assured me, were safe in storage. I never pushed. I never questioned, because the alternative that the sister who once defended me from schoolyard bullies could look into my grieving eyes and tell me a lie so profound it would shape my entire reality was simply unthinkable. My world was built on the bedrock of trust I had in her, and that bedrock I was about to discover was nothing but sand. There is a unique quality to the silence in a doctor's office after bad news. It's a thick, heavy silence filled with the echo of words like biopsy and we need to be sure. The world outside the window continues, vibrant and indifferent, while your own world has shrunk to the size of this small, sterile room. The suspicious shadows on my scan were all I could see. They were a timeline suddenly having a very real, very sharp endpoint. In that terrifying clarity, all I wanted was my mother, not her memory, not a photograph, but her essence, her strength. I needed to know how she faced her own mortality with such grace. And so, driven by a primal, desperate need, I climbed the pull-down ladder into my attic. It wasn't a chore. It was a pilgrimage. The air was thick with dust and the ghosts of Christmases past. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, an old letter, a photograph I'd forgotten, anything. I was moving boxes, creating a path through the accumulation of a lifetime, when I saw the trunk. It was shoved into a far corner, behind my children's old crib and a stack of yearbooks. It was Clara's trunk, the one she'd left with me when she'd downsized. With a grunt, I pulled it out. The latches were stiff, but they gave. On top, folded neatly, were her old coats. I lifted them out one by one, the fine wool smelling faintly of mothballs and her old perfume, and then it was. Lying at the bottom of the trunk, as if it had been placed there just yesterday, was the diary, the familiar scuffed brown leather, the little brass lock gleaming dully in the dim light from the single bare bulb. My heart didn't leap, it plummeted. For a full minute, I didn't move. I just sat on the dusty floor, my hands trembling, staring at this object that was supposed to be lost forever. The cold, terrible dread began to spread from my chest to my fingertips. If the diary was here, a deliberate physical object, then nothing Clara had told me was true. The entire narrative of my life for the past 45 years was a lie. Almost without thinking, my hands went to the coats I'd piled beside me. I felt in the pockets one by one, and in the pocket of her favorite, a beautiful cream-colored cashmere coat, my fingers closed around something small and cold and metal. I pulled it out. The key! It was as if she had locked away the truth, and then with an arrogance I still cannot fathom left the key within my reach. Or perhaps she had simply forgotten. In her world of finance and important deals, this small, cruel deceit was so insignificant to her that she couldn't even be bothered to properly conceal it. The sound of the lock turning was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my past unlatching. I opened the cover. My mother's handwriting, that elegant, flowing script, leapt off the page. It was like hearing her voice after decades of silence. I started from the beginning, devouring her words, her joy at a successful painting, her worry when Clara scraped her knee, her dreams for our futures. It was all there, a beautiful, painful symphony of her life. And then I turned the page to the final entries. The writing was shakier, the lines less sure, but the voice was unmistakably hers. I read her entry from October 12th, written just 2 months before she passed. My eyes scanned the lines, and with each word, the floor beneath me felt less and less solid. October 12th, a difficult day, but a necessary one. I met with Clara and Mr. Hemlock today in my room. I wanted them both to hear it from me directly. I have had a new will drawn up. The old one is null and void. The house is not to be sold. It is to go to May, outright. She is the artist's soul in this family. She understands that a home is more than bricks and mortar. It is a living memory. She will care for the studio. She will keep its spirit alive. The life insurance policy is for Clara to secure her future, as she values financial security so deeply. But my paintings, my life's work, they are not to be scattered to the winds. They are to be placed in a trust. The proceeds from any sales are to be used solely for May's children's education and their children's after them. This is my legacy. This is the golden thread. I have made my wishes perfectly clear. I had to read it 3 times before the words would arrange themselves into a coherent meaning. A new will, a true will, drawn up by the senior partner of Clara's own firm, a man of unimpeachable reputation. A will that gifted me the heart of our family, the home that was my sanctuary. A will that created a protective trust, a nest egg forged from my mother's creativity for my children and grandchildren. A will that my sister knew about. A will she had sat in the room and heard read aloud. A will she had suppressed, destroyed, buried. The pieces of the 45-year puzzle began to snap into place with a terrifying, brutal clarity. She sold the house. She kept every single penny of the profit for herself. She had taken our mother's paintings, her life's work, her soul rendered in color and form, and she had sold them off one by one over the decades to galleries and private collectors. She had pocketed every single dollar. She didn't just steal a house. She didn't just steal money. She stole my children's future. She stole my mother's final sacred wish. She took a pair of financial scissors and with a cold, calculated snip, she severed the golden thread. But the most chilling part, the sentence that made the blood drain from my face and left me cold and shaking on the attic floor, was my mother's very last entry, written just a week before she passed. I fear Clara's heart has been hardened by the world of numbers and deals. She did not like the new will. She argued with me. I told her my decision was final, that it was about love, not money. She looked at me and she said, "We'll see, Mother, we'll see." There was a coldness in her eyes I have never seen before. It frightened me. I have locked this diary. I feel I must. My mother was frightened of my sister in her final days. That truth was a physical pain in my chest. So, now you know my secret. The terrible, crushing weight I have been carrying for 3 months. The stone in my heart. The question that now screams in the silence is this: what do you do when you discover that the person you trusted most in the world, the architect of your understanding of the past, is a stranger, a carefully constructed fiction? What do you do when the very ground you have walked on for your entire life is not just cracked, but reveals itself to be a cavernous lie, and you are left standing on the precipice, staring into the abyss? So there I was, sitting in the dust of my attic, holding the proof of a betrayal so vast I could barely comprehend its edges. The truth was a bomb that had detonated in silence, leaving my internal landscape in ruins. But a strange thing happens when you hit absolute bedrock. There's no further to fall. And from that solid, if terrible, foundation, you can begin to rebuild. The first wave was pure, unadulterated rage, a white-hot, incandescent fury that made my hands shake and my vision blur. I wanted to drive to Clara's perfect, manicured home in her gated community and scream her lies back at her through her own expensive intercom. I wanted to expose her to the entire world, to print the diary entries and mail them to everyone she knew. I wanted to watch her empire of lies crumble into dust. But as I sat there, breathing in the dust and the anger, my eyes fell back to the diary, open to my mother's final words. Not the words about the will, but the earlier ones, the ones about strategy. She had written in her elegant script, "A reaction, my dear May, is born of raw emotion. It is the flinch of a wounded animal. A response, however, is born of strategy. It is the considered move of a queen on a chessboard. Always strive to be a queen, not a pawn." In that moment, my mother wasn't a memory. She was my strategist, whispering from the past. This couldn't be about my rage. That would be a reaction. This had to be about justice. That would be a response. This was my first true lesson in heartful healing. Your pain is a valid, crucial witness, but it cannot be the one holding the gavel. Your actions must be intentional, not impulsive. So I became a detective of my own life, a historian of my own betrayal. The retired school teacher began a master's degree in forensic accounting and family law. I started in the quiet, digital corridors of public records. I found the deed of sale for our family home. Seeing the official document with Clara's flawless signature authorizing the sale was like a punch to the gut. The sum, which had seemed substantial at the time, was, when adjusted for inflation and the property's skyrocketing value in that neighborhood, a fortune, a life-changing fortune that had been solely hers. Then I knew I needed a guide. I hired Martin, a private investigator. I was terrified he would be a cynical, hard-bitten man from a television show. But Martin was different. He was in his late 60s, with kind eyes that had seen every manner of human deceit, but had miraculously retained their compassion. I didn't want him to destroy my sister. I told him, my voice trembling, that I just wanted the truth, the whole, unvarnished truth. He nodded and said, "The truth is often its own form of justice, May. Let's go find it." And find it we did. Martin was a bloodhound. He tracked my mother's paintings. It was a heartbreaking timeline of liquidation. A beautiful, haunting portrait of my grandmother sold at a Sotheby's auction in 1992. A series of her famous garden landscapes sold to a private collector in Tokyo in 2005. The small, intimate painting of me reading under the willow tree sold just a decade ago to a gallery in Chelsea. My mother's work, it turned out, had not just held its value, it had exploded in worth. She was now considered a significant, if underrated, talent of her period. That small landscape of our backyard, the one I remember her painting on a lazy Sunday afternoon, sold for over $80,000. There were over 30 major works. The trust for my children, the one my mother had so carefully stipulated, would have been worth well over $1 million today. My sister hadn't just stolen their inheritance, she had stolen a legacy of opportunity. The meeting with my lawyer, a sharp, brilliantly compassionate woman named Ms. Davis, was a sobering dose of reality. She held the diary with reverence, but also with professional skepticism. She said, "This is powerful, May. It's a roadmap to the crime. But in a court of law, it's circumstantial. It's her word against a deceased woman's word. We need the weapon itself. We need the will. The original, executed will." And so began the long, demoralizing slog through bureaucratic quicksand. Mr. Hemlock's firm had been swallowed by a larger corporate entity years earlier. Their records were stored in a vast off-site facility. Every phone call was a new exercise in frustration. Those records are sealed. You need a court order. That specific attorney has been deceased for 15 years. It felt like my sister's ghost was in every office, slamming doors in my face. She had built a fortress of paperwork and time, and I was a lone soldier with a diary, trying to scale its walls. And the whole time, the cancer scare was a ticking clock in the back of my mind. What if I won the battle, but ran out of time to enjoy the peace? This, my dear, is the part of the story where the viewership drops. The long, hard, lonely middle. The marathon after the initial sprint of shock is worn off. The victory seems like a mirage on a horizon that never gets any closer. This is where you have to find your why. You have to dig for it like a well in the desert. My why was not the money. It wasn't even the house, as much as I ached for its familiar rooms. My why was my mother's voice pleading from the pages to be heard. My why was the principle of the thing. It was about standing up and saying to the universe and to my sister, "You do not get to erase a person's final wishes. You do not get to take a pair of shears to the golden thread of legacy. That is a sacred violation." And then a crack of light, not a sledgehammer, but a pinpoint of hope. The Bar Association. Ms. Davis, in a moment of inspired desperation, reached out to them for oversight. And there, a young intern, probably overworked and underpaid, heard the tremor of raw truth in my lawyer's voice. She went the extra mile. She dug through digital archives and old filing systems, and she found it. The registration. The will had been filed with the bar. We had a case number, a date, the names of the witnesses. It was no longer a ghost. It was a documented fact. My mother's final wishes were not the fantasy of a grieving daughter. They were a legal reality that had been deliberately hidden. Now came the moment I had been simultaneously dreading and craving: the confrontation. Not a dramatic, tear-filled scene, but a legal and psychological one. We sent a formal, impeccably worded letter from Ms. Davis's firm to Clara. It was cold, precise, and utterly terrifying. It stated in unassailable legal language that we were aware of the existence and registration of Eleanor Davies's last will and testament, that we were in the process of obtaining the original document, and that we intended to pursue its validation in probate court to rectify the administrative error that had occurred 45 years prior. The politeness of it was its own kind of weapon. The phone rang exactly 1 hour and 7 minutes later. I know, because I was staring at the clock, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The caller ID lit up with her name, Clara. My hand hovered over the receiver. This was it. The past and the present were about to collide in a shower of sparks. Do you answer the call when you know the serpent is on the other end, poised to strike? Or do you let the lawyers build the wall? What would you have done in that moment, with your entire life hanging in the balance? I picked it up. May. Her voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the razor's edge of fury beneath the surface. What is this ridiculousness? A new will? You're having another one of your episodes. You're not well. You've always been too sensitive, too prone to imagination. My own voice, when it came, was calmer than I expected. It was steady. I'm not imagining the diary, Clara. I'm not imagining Mom's words, or the key I found in the pocket of your cashmere coat. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. It was a silence filled with the sound of calculations, of crumbling defenses. When she spoke again, the controlled mask had slipped, revealing the cold steel beneath. You had no right to go through my personal property. That diary was private. Mother was confused, doped up on medication. That so-called will was a mistake, a moment of sentimentality. I protected you from it. I protected you from her foolish, romantic notions. You would have frittered that money away on your little hobbies, your simple life. I built something, an empire. I used that money to build an empire. It wasn't your money to build an empire with, Clara. It was mine. And it was my children's. There was another pause. And then the two most chilling words I have ever heard, delivered with a sneer I could feel through the phone line. Prove it. And in that moment, as the dial tone buzzed in my ear, I knew.
I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones we would win. Because when a tyrant, secure in their fortress, tells you to prove it, it's not a statement of strength. It's a confession of terror. She was terrified that I could. We never saw the inside of a courtroom. My lawyer, Miss Davis, was a genius of strategy. She advised that a long, public, and vicious court battle would only drain the estate further in legal fees and destroy what was left of my spirit. Clara's lawyer, I can only assume, gave her the same bleak prognosis. The evidence was now a tidal wave. The diary, the Bar Association filing, the PI's damning report on the art sales, and the imminent procurement of the original will. So we agreed to mediation. A quiet, clinical end to a noisy, emotional war. The mediator's office was a study in neutral tones. Beige walls, a polished wooden table, art that was chosen to offend no one. It was a room designed to strip away passion. And it succeeded. Clara sat across from me, flanked by her attorney. She was impeccably dressed, in a severe dark suit, her hair a perfect helmet of silver. But for the first time in my life, I saw cracks in the marble. A pallor to her skin, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor in her hand as she reached for her water glass. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Watching her, I waited for the triumph to come. I waited for the schadenfreude, the sweet, bitter taste of victory. But it never arrived. Instead, I was washed over by a wave of such profound, heartbreaking sadness. I was looking at a woman who had lived inside a prison of her own making for 45 years. Every family dinner, every stilted Christmas card, every polite phone call, all of it was a performance. She had to look at me, talk to me, all the while carrying the crushing weight of her deception. What a lonely, desolate way to live. Her empire was built on a foundation of sand, and she had been its solitary, terrified prisoner. The mediator, a calm, unflappable woman, laid out the facts with the dispassion of a scientist. She presented the confession of facts Clara was required to sign. It was a cold, point-by-point recitation of the theft. Then she slid the proposed settlement agreement across the table. The terms were these. In exchange for us not pursuing criminal charges for fraud and perjury, Clara would sign the confession. She would liquidate a significant portion of her assets to pay me the full current market value of our family home at the time of its sale, with 45 years of compounded interest, a sum that was staggering in its own right. And further, she would immediately fund a new ironclad trust for my children and grandchildren with a principal amount equal to the highest appraised value of every single one of our mother's paintings, plus every dollar of profit she had ever received from their sale.
It was more money than I could ever have dreamed of, more than I could possibly spend in my lifetime. But as I held the elegant, heavy pen in my hand, ready to press my name to the paper that would make it all official, my hand didn't shake from excitement over the wealth. It shook from the finality. This signature was the official, legal, and spiritual severing of the tie. The sister from the pillow forts, the protector from the schoolyard, the partner in grief. She was gone, not with a bang, but with the scratch of a pen on paper. I was signing her out of my life forever. Had that sister ever truly existed, or was she just a role played by a brilliant actress in the early acts of my life? I signed my name. For my mother, whose voice was finally being honored. For my children, whose future was now secured. For the little girl I once was, who believed with all her heart in the golden thread.
As we all stood to leave, a formality ended, Clara paused at the door. She turned, and for a single protracted moment, her eyes met mine. It was a complex, unreadable look, a swirling vortex of hatred, of deep, shameful humiliation, and I swear, a flicker of something else, something that looked like the ghost of regret. Then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. She turned on her heel and walked out of the room, out of my life, without a single word. And just like that, it was over. The war was won, the legacy was reclaimed, the external battle was complete. But my heart was a battlefield after the armies have left, quiet, scarred, littered with the debris of broken trust. The conflict with Clara was resolved. Now began the most important war of all, the war for my own peace, the journey of heartful healing. So, my dear friend, what wisdom did I glean from this half-century-long journey through the valleys of betrayal and up the hard-won peaks of redemption? What gifts, wrapped in the barbed wire of pain, did I bring back with me? First, I learned that grief and gratitude are not opposing forces. They are dance partners in the ballroom of healing. I gave myself full permission to grieve. I grieved for the loss of my sister, not the woman she became, but the idea of her, the memory of the protector I thought I had. I will always carry a scar for that loss, and I have learned to be gentle with it. But in that very same heart, I cultivated a profound, overwhelming gratitude for the mother I had, for her wisdom, which guided me like a north star from beyond the veil, for the resilient, beautiful family I built with my own hands and heart, who are my living, breathing legacy. The pain of the past does not have the power to veto the joy of the present. They can and they must coexist. Second, I learned the true meaning of reclaiming inner peace. For months, my peace was a hostage to the outcome. I will be happy when we win. I will be at peace when she pays. That is a treacherous lie we tell ourselves. It puts our inner tranquility on layaway for a price that may never be paid. I had to learn to find moments of peace amidst the fight. It was in the quiet, sacred ritual of my morning tea, feeling the warm cup in my hands. It was in the uncontrollable, joyous laughter of my grandchildren playing in the next room. It was in the steady, unwavering support of my husband, who simply held my hand when words failed. Your peace is not the trophy you receive at the finish line. It is the very breath that fuels you for each step of the race. You must claim it moment by moment, especially when the world is in chaos. And finally, I learned the revolutionary act of self-compassion. For years, a vicious internal prosecutor berated me. How could you have been so blind, so naive, so stupid? It took me a long time to silence that voice. My dear, you were not blind, you were trusting. You were not naive, you were loving. You were not stupid, you were loyal. The fault, the shame, the disgrace, it lies entirely with the one who betrays that sacred trust, not with the one who offers it. You must learn to speak to yourself with the same kindness, the same gentle understanding that you would offer your very best friend if they were sitting where you are now, their heart in tatters. So, what did I do with the money, the vast, life-changing sum of money? I did not buy a yacht or a mansion. Those are things Clara would have done. I used the money from the house to establish a small nonprofit artists retreat in my mother's name. It's called the Golden Thread Retreat. It gives other artist souls, like my mother, like me, a space of quiet and beauty to create, to heal, to weave their own threads. The trust for my children is secure, a fortress of opportunity that my sister could not breach. Their futures and the futures of their children are bright with possibility. And I bought this. She touches the simple locket at her neck. It's not expensive, but it's priceless. Inside, on a tiny folded piece of paper, is a single line from my mother's diary in my own handwriting. It says, "The golden thread is not woven from gold, but from forgiveness. It is the only material that once woven can never be cut." I have not spoken to Clara since that day in the mediator's office, and that is okay. That is a necessary boundary for my health. But I want to be very clear about forgiveness because it is so often misunderstood. Forgiveness is not about reconciliation. It is not about having coffee with the person who shattered your world. It is not a declaration that what they did was okay. Forgiveness is about releasing the poison of bitterness from your own soul. It is about understanding on a deep level that their actions are a profound reflection of their own inner poverty, their own wounds, their own lack. It is not a reflection of your worth. I forgive Clara for me, so that I can be free, so that I can stop carrying the weight of her corruption in my heart, so that my own golden thread, the one I weave for my family, can remain strong, resilient, and unbreakable. Your story of betrayal might be different. It might be a friend who became a stranger, a partner who became a traitor, a business associate who became a thief. But the path to heartful healing is the same. You must allow yourself to feel the shock, to tremble with the impact. You must grieve the loss, to mourn the person or the future you thought you had. You must find your why, your North Star that will guide you through the darkness. You must gather your evidence, both the legal documents and the emotional testimonies of your own heart. You must fight for your justice with the steady hand of strategy, not the flailing limbs of rage. And then you must do the most sacred, most important work of all. You must take the scarred, bloodied soil of your battlefield, and you must tenderly, patiently turn it into a garden. If this story has resonated with you, If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal that took your breath away, I would be so honored if you felt safe enough to share a piece of your own story in the comments below. Let's not be islands of pain. Let's build a community of healers here, a tapestry of survivors. Let's weave our own magnificent, unbreakable golden thread of support and understanding.